Oscar Wilde. In Oscar Wilde's comedy, The Importance of Being Earnest, 1895, there is an account of a rakish character, Ernest Worthing, whose death in a Paris hotel is reported by the manager. 5 years later, Wilde died in Paris, where he was living in exile, attended by a hotel manager. The coincidence seems a curious paradigm of Wilde's career, for the connections between his life and his art were unusually close. Indeed, in his last years, he told Andre Guida that he seemed to have put his genius into his life and only his talent into his writings. His father, Sir William, was a distinguished surgeon in Dublin, where Wilde was born and grew up. After studying classics at Trinity College, Dublin, he won a scholarship to Oxford and there established a brilliant academic record. At Oxford he came under the influence of the aesthetic theories of John Ruskin, who was at the time professor of fine arts and, more important, of Walter Pater. With characteristic hyperbole, Wilde affirmed of Pater's studies in the history of the Renaissance, 1873, "It is my golden book, I never travel anywhere without it. But it is the very flower of decadence, the last trumpet should have sounded the moment it was written." After graduating in 1878, Wilde moved to London, where his fellow Irishmen Bernard Shaw and William Butler Yeats were also to settle. Here Wilde quickly established himself as both a writer and as a spokesperson for the school of art for art's sake. In Wilde's view, the school included not only French poets and critics, but also a line of English poets, going back through Dante Gabriel Rossetti and the Pre-Raphaelites to John Keats. In 1882 he visited America for a long and successful lecture tour, during which he startled audiences by airing the gospel of the aesthetic movement. In one of these lectures, he asserted that to disagree with three-fourths of all England on all points of view is one of the first elements of sanity. For his role as a spokesperson for aestheticism, Wilde had many gifts. From all accounts, he was a dazzling conversationalist. Yeats reported, after first listening to him, "I never before heard a man talking with perfect sentences, as if he had written them all overnight with labor, and yet all spontaneous." Wilde delighted his listeners not only by his polished wordplay, but also by uttering opinions that were both outrageous and incongruous. For example, his solemn affirmation that Queen Victoria was one of the 3 women he most admired and whom he would have married with pleasure. The other 2 were the actress Sarah Bernhardt and Lily Langtry, reputedly a mistress of Victoria's son Edward, Prince of Wales. In addition to his mastery of witty conversation, Wilde had the gifts of an actor who delights in gaining attention. Pater had been a very shy and reticent man, but there was nothing reticent about his disciple, who had early discovered that a flamboyant style of dress was one of the most effective means of gaining attention. Like the dandies of the earlier decades of the 19th century, including Benjamin Disraeli and Charles Dickens, Wilde favored colorful costumes in marked contrast to the sober black suits of the late Victorian middle classes. A green carnation in his buttonhole and velvet knee breeches became for Wilde badges of his youthful iconoclasm, and even when he approached middle age, he continued to emphasize the gap between generations. In a letter written when he was 42 years old, he remarks, "The opinions of the old on matters of art are, of course, of no value whatever." Wilde's campaign quickly gained an amused response from middle-class quarters. In 1881, W.S. Gilbert and Sir Arthur Sullivan staged their comic opera Patience, which mocked the affectations of the aesthetes in the character of Bunthorne, especially in his song, "If You're Anxious for a Shine in the High Aesthetic Line." Wilde's successes for 17 years in England and America were, of course, not limited to his self-advertising stunts as a dandy. In his writings he excelled in a variety of genres, as a critic of literature and of society, The Decay of Lying, 1889, and The Soul of Man Under Socialism, 1891, and also as a novelist, poet, and dramatist. Much of his prose writing, including The Critic as Artist, 1890, develops Pater's aestheticism, particularly its sense of the superiority of art to life and its lack of obligation to any standards of mimesis. His novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, which created a sensation when it was published in 1891, takes a somewhat different perspective. The novel is a strikingly ingenious story of a handsome young man and his selfish pursuit of sensual pleasures. Until the end of the book, he remains fresh and healthy in appearance, while his portrait mysteriously changes into a horrible image of his corrupted soul. Although the preface to the novel emphasizes that art and morality are totally separate, in the novel, at least in its later chapters, Wilde seems to be portraying the evils of self-regarding hedonism. As a poet, Wilde felt overshadowed by the Victorian predecessors whom he admired, Robert Browning, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and Algernon Charles Swinburne, and had trouble finding his own voice. Many of the poems in his first volume, 1881, are highly derivative, but pieces such as Impressions du Matin, 1885, and The Harlot's House, 1881, offer a distinctive perspective on city streets that seems to anticipate early poems by T.S. Eliot. His most outstanding success, however, was as a writer of comedies, staged in London and New York from 1892 through 1895. These included Lady Windermere's Fan, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and The Importance of Being Earnest. In the spring of 1895, this triumphant success suddenly crumbled when Wilde was arrested and sentenced to prison with hard labor for 2 years. Although Wilde was married and the father of 2 children, he did not hide his relationships with men, and in fact ended up shaping, to his personal cost, a long-standing public image of the homosexual. When he began a romance in 1891 with the handsome young man poet Lord Alfred Douglas, he set in motion the events that brought about his ruin. In 1895, Lord Alfred's father, the Marquess of Queensberry, accused Wilde of homosexuality. Wilde recklessly sued for libel, lost the case, and was thereupon arrested and convicted for what had only recently come onto the statute books as a serious offense. A late addition to the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, known as the Labouchere Amendment, after the Member of Parliament who had proposed it, effectively criminalized all forms of sexual relations between men. The revulsion of feeling against him in Britain and America was violent, and the aesthetic movement suffered a severe setback, not only with the public, but among writers as well. His 2 years in jail led Wilde to write 2 sober and emotionally high-pitched works, his poem The Ballad of Reading Gaol, 1898, and his prose confession De Profundis, 1905. After leaving prison, Wilde, a ruined man, emigrated to France, where he lived out the last 3 years of his life under an assumed name. Before his departure from England, he had been divorced and declared a bankrupt, and in France he had to rely on friends for financial support. Wilde is buried in Paris in the Père Lachaise cemetery.